Bear down, fam. Something's not right at Halas Hall. Weeks from week one, and nobody still knows who's protecting Caleb Williams' left side. And what Ben Johnson said this week sounds more like a warning than news. Marcus Davenport signed with the Bears, and in a minute I'll tell you if it's a smart bet or a disguised medical risk. And Kyler Gordon, the nickel corner with the big extension, is about to become a footnote. Let's get into it. Navy and orange till the wheels fall off. Okay, this is the story of the day for me. And it is not even close. Because we are not talking about a depth player here. We are talking about the position that most directly decides whether Caleb Williams finishes this season standing up or finishes it on the bench with ice on his shoulder. Let's build this from the beginning, because a lot of people only saw the headline and missed the layers underneath it. Here's how we got here. In 2025, the Bears made one of the best moves of that entire offseason. They sent a 4th-round pick to the Kansas City Chiefs for Joe Thuney. That's it. That's all it cost. A 4th-rounder for a guard who went on to make his 4th straight All-Pro team, his 5th in a 10-year career, and on top of that, won the league's very first Protector of the Year award. He's locked in for 2 more years at $35 million total. He turns 34 this season, and he still plays like he's 26. But while Thuney was doing that, the other side of that line was an organized mess. Last season, the Bears rotated through 3 different starters at left tackle. They started with Braxton Jones, demoted him for Theo Benedette, and closed out the season with Ozzie Trapilo, a 20-25 second-round pick, as the starter down the stretch. And honestly, Trapilo earned that job by playing well, not by default. So why are we still talking about this in August of 2026? Because in the wild card round against the Green Bay Packers, Trapilo tore his patellar tendon, a brutal injury. The team's initial projection had him missing most of the season. And that moment, that exact moment in a playoff loss, is the reason why right now, in the middle of training camp, we still do not know who's protecting Caleb's blindside. Here's what Ben Johnson said this week, and why it matters to me. Johnson spoke at length with reporters this week about this situation, and what he said has 2 layers to it. The first layer is about Thuney. Johnson said, quote, that Thuney would like some clarity on who he can build a rapport with. It's been a little bit of a revolving door. He added that Thuney is a pro's pro who's willing to do everything, but that the goal is 5 guys playing as one. Think about what that actually means on the field. An offensive line isn't 5 individuals. It's a unit that needs silent communication, protection adjustments made with a glance instead of words. When your left guard, an all-pro on a yearly basis, still doesn't know for sure who is going to be next to him in week 1, that communication doesn't get built. It gets rebuilt, over and over again. The second layer is Johnson's philosophy on not rushing the decision. He said flat out that they'll take as long as they need to figure out who those 5 guys are, but that the sooner they make that call, the sooner that unit can start to gel as a group. And here's the part that worries me a little. Johnson himself admitted that last year the offensive line didn't start clicking until the bye week. That's more than half a regular season without full chemistry up front. If that repeats in 2026, with a roster that's supposed to be in contention mode after finishing as the NFC's number 2 seed, that's a real problem, not a training camp footnote. Now for the Trapilo factor, the good news that isn't quite good news yet. General Manager Ryan Poles said last week that he's hopeful Trapilo can return sooner than the team originally thought. In fact, Poles indicated there's a real chance Trapilo could be back on the practice field before the preseason wraps up. And just in the last few hours, Ben Johnson gave an even more direct update. He said physically they feel really good about where Trapilo's at, and that now it's a race to see how quickly they can rebuild his confidence. He said word for word that they see this stretch of training camp, with the padded practices coming up, as the perfect opportunity to build that confidence back. But, and this matters, just because he's off the PUP list doesn't mean he's going to be healthy enough to start the regular season. There's still a real chance he opens the year on injured reserve. That's exactly why the Bears didn't just sit around and wait. They brought Braxton Jones back on a 1-year deal, and they brought in Jedrick Wills on a league minimum contract. Theo Benedette is still on the roster, and will probably end up as the reserve swing tackle. That means out of that trio between Jones, Amagaji, and Wills, probably 2 of them make the final 53, and whoever finishes 3rd could be facing a cut when the league asks for that roster. And here's the signal I don't think enough people are watching. After the preseason opener against the Browns, which the Bears won 34-10, neither Amagaji nor Wills helped their case in that game. And in Tuesday's practice right after, both of them got moved over to right tackle. Meanwhile, Braxton Jones and Theo Benedette kept getting the reps at left tackle. Listen, I know this is tea leaf reading, but it's the right tea leaf reading. When a coaching staff moves 2 guys from the left side to the right side after a rough performance, that's usually not a random experiment. That's usually a sign those 2 aren't winning the competition on the side that matters most, and the staff is testing whether they have value as depth on the other side before time runs out. If I had to bet today, and I could be wrong, I'd bet Braxton Jones ends up as the Week 1 starter while Trapilo recovers. with Wills and Amagagi fighting it out for the backup role. Before I close this story, I want you to understand why this matters so much to the coaching staff. Offensive coordinator Press Taylor talked about Thuney this week, and what he said was almost poetic for a guy who usually talks in scheme language. He said, "You have to remember to watch Thuney because nothing pops, nothing draws attention, because Thuney just eliminates a guy instantly." He said Thuney has incredibly strong hands, that when he gets his hands on somebody, the rush stops, the movement stops. And he told a story I thought was genuine. In a walkthrough before the Cleveland game, Thuney, who already has his job locked down, was out there on scout team defense playing nickel, joking around, having fun, while quarterback Case Keenum was literally sitting there thinking out loud that this guy won 6 Super Bowls, and he's out here having the time of his life playing scout team nickel in a walkthrough. That's the level of professionalism getting put through the ringer while the organization can't give him clarity on who's lining up next to him. My conditional prediction, doubts included, my read, and this could change in 2 weeks, is this. If Trapilo isn't ready for week 1, which is the most likely outcome based on everything we've heard, Braxton Jones opens the season at left tackle simply because he has the most recent experience at that exact spot. Wills and Amagagi compete for the backup role and for a spot on the 53-man roster. And if Trapilo comes back healthy sometime around October or November, that's when this story gets genuinely interesting, because now you're talking about a guy who earned the job last season trying to reclaim it in the middle of this one. That's a logistical headache tactically, but it's also a depth advantage very few teams in this league can say they have. And I want to add something that probably won't make everybody happy. Compare this to what teams already sitting at the top of the conference have. The Eagles have known who their 5 up front were for years before training camp even opens. The Lions, with Ben Johnson on their staff just a year ago, built continuity in the trenches season after season. We're still, in the middle of August, shuffling guys between left and right like we're building a puzzle without the box showing the picture. That's not a cheap shot at Ryan Poles, because the roster overall is in a much better spot than it was 3 years ago. But at this specific position, we're still paying the bill for an injury nobody could control. And that's the part that frustrates me most as a fan. It's not that the organization made a bad call. It's that football sometimes punishes you even when you do everything right, and Trapilo's patellar tendon didn't ask anybody's permission. Okay, that one was heavy. But stick around, because what's coming up next connects directly to this story, protecting the same roster from the other side of the ball. He signed a 1-year deal this week, and I want to be completely honest with you about what this actually means, because there are people online treating this like it solves the pass rush, and other people treating it like it's completely irrelevant. The truth, like almost always, is somewhere in the middle. Here's who Davenport is and why Chicago knows him so well. Davenport was the 14th overall pick in the 2018 draft, selected by the New Orleans Saints. And here's the connection that makes this signing make sense beyond the paperwork. The Bears' current defensive coordinator, Dennis Allen, was his defensive coordinator in New Orleans from 2018 through 2022. And Ben Johnson was on the Lions coaching staff when Davenport played there in 2024. So this isn't a guy walking in to learn a brand new scheme. This is a guy who already speaks the language of the 2 men who are going to decide whether he plays this year. Now the problem, and I have to say it straight, is health. Let's be honest about the injury history, because glossing over it would do you a disservice. Davenport tore his triceps in 2024. He had a chest injury in 2025 that limited him severely. Between those 2 seasons with the Lions, he missed 24 combined games. Before that, in 2023 with the Vikings, he missed 13 games with an ankle injury. And across his 5 years with the Saints, he missed 19 games to various injuries. That's a pattern, not a rough stretch. And the recent production doesn't help the optimistic argument either. Despite starting 7 games for the Lions last year, Pro Football Focus graded him as the 103rd ranked edge rusher out of 115 they evaluated league-wide. 103 out of 115. That is not a guy anywhere near his peak. His best season was 2021 with the Saints, when he had 9 sacks, 16 quarterback pressures, and 9 tackles for loss. Since then, over the 4 seasons combined, he has exactly 4 sacks. 4. In 4 years. So why does this signing still make sense? Before you think I'm completely against this move, let me explain why it makes sense inside the specific context of the Bears roster. Montez Sweat and Dio Odeyingbo both carry cap hits north of $20 million each this season, with few realistic options to move either one. Austin Booker and Shamar Turner are recent draft picks still trying to earn consistent roles. That leaves you with 4 edges tied up in real financial or draft investment, and basically no proven depth behind them. Davenport comes in to compete for that 5th spot alongside Daniel Hardy, who signed a 2-year deal worth $4.97 million based mostly on his special teams value, and Jamry Chroma, a practice squad player who turned heads with 6 tackles in the preseason opener against the Browns. The Bears registered 3 sacks in that game, won 34-10, and the coaching staff still decided they needed more depth in the rush. That tells you something about how seriously they're taking this position. Here's what else happened around the signing on the roster side. To make room for Davenport, the Bears waived tight end Nikola Kalinic with an injury designation after he hurt his knee in the first quarter against Cleveland, and they also waived running back Coleman Bennett. They also signed cornerback Deantre Prince, who played for Louisville in the UFL this year. All of this happened in the same week the team also had to deal with Kyle Monagai's knee injury, a hyperextension that's going to keep him out for several weeks. August training camp, man, it never stops. My honest opinion, doubts included, my take is this. Davenport is a low-risk, moderate-ceiling bet. He is not going to save the Bears' pass rush by himself, and anybody telling you otherwise is selling you something. But if he stays healthy, which his history makes genuinely hard to predict, the familiarity with Dennis Allen's scheme could get more out of him than his recent numbers would suggest. I have seen lower-profile guys outperform expectations when the scheme and the relationship with the coordinator already existed beforehand. I could be wrong, and this exact type of depth signing has burned me before with guys who never turned into anything. But the risk here is low. If it doesn't work out, you lost a depth roster spot, not a contract that ties your hands. There's one more thing I want to say about this, even if it sounds a little contradictory. Signings like Davenport's are exactly the kind of move people on social media ignore right up until it works, and then suddenly everybody claims they knew it all along. I'd rather be honest with you now, in August, before I know how the story ends. This isn't the kind of signing that fills up a highlight reel. It's the kind of signing that, if it works, shows up in Week 15 when a rotational pass rusher is still healthy and still producing while the starters start wearing down. That's the real value of depth, and it's something we as fans almost never applaud until it's already too late to appreciate in the moment. Bear down, but this last story is the one that puts me in a bad mood. And to close things out, let's talk about Kyler Gordon, because what's happening here isn't just another injury update. It's a professional relationship fading out in real time, and the coaching staff isn't even bothering to hide it anymore. Here's the context you need. In the spring of 2025, the Bears gave Gordon a 3-year extension. That was the organization betting on their nickel corner as a core piece of the secondary's future. Since then, Gordon has played exactly 3 games across the entire 2025 season. 3 out of 17 possible. Injuries have chased him since he signed that deal, and now, weeks away from the 2026 season kicking off, there's still no clear update on when or if he's coming back to the field. Here's what the coaching staff said, or more accurately, what they didn't say. This week, Ben Johnson gave the shortest answers I've heard him give about any player when asked about Gordon. And the very next day, defensive coordinator Dennis Allen was even more direct, almost brutally honest. When asked about Gordon, Allen said, quote, "It's something I can't put a lot of thought into right now. I've got to focus on the guys we have." Read that back. The team's defensive coordinator, talking about a player who signed a 3-year extension barely a year and a half ago, is saying he can't afford to spend mental energy on him. That's not passing frustration. That's a coaching staff that has already shifted its attention elsewhere, and they're saying it out loud without even being pushed twice. Here are the numbers that could decide this. This is where it gets cold in the financial sense. If the Bears decide to keep Gordon on injured reserve and release him after the season ends, they'd save around $8.3 million. If instead they decide to cut ties with him right now during this season, they'd be left with $17.5 million in dead cap. I checked both of these numbers directly on SpotRack before recording, so this isn't a social media rumor. It's the real figure that's going to be sitting on Ryan Poles' desk. That massive difference is exactly why, no matter what the coaching staff feels, this decision is probably going to get made with a calculator, not with anybody's gut. Here's my personal rad and why it's hard for me to stay optimistic. Look, I'm not going to pretend I have a crystal ball here. But when a defensive coordinator publicly says he's not thinking about a player, and when the organization is clearly putting more rehab energy into Kobe Bryant than into Gordon, the reading between the lines is pretty clear. I'm not saying it's fair. Gordon was a productive player when healthy, a nickel corner with real instincts against the run and enough speed to cover in the slot. But football doesn't forgive an injury history, especially not when you already committed a full extension to someone who barely made it onto the field. My conditional prediction: if Gordon doesn't show visible progress over the next few weeks of training camp, I think he finishes this season on injured reserve without playing a single down, and they release him in the 2027 offseason to save that $8.3 million. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong, because when this guy was healthy, he played with an energy this secondary genuinely needs. But honestly, after hearing how Allen talked this week, it wouldn't surprise me if this is already decided behind closed doors. And I can't close this story without saying what I actually think underneath all of it. This organization has a pattern, and this isn't the first time I've pointed it out on this channel. They commit real money to players with medical risk, and whether that's through an extension like with Gordon or through an acquisition like some other names in the secondary and defensive line in recent years. And then once that risk actually shows up, the relationship cools off faster than you'd expect. I'm not saying it's malicious. I'm saying it's the cold reality of a business where the cap doesn't care about feelings. But as a fan, it still leaves an uneasy feeling watching a guy you called a priority a year and a half ago turn into a footnote in under 18 months. And there you have it. 3 stories that, if you look at them together, are telling the same underlying story. This franchise is rebuilding its spine, the offensive line protecting Caleb, the pass rush pressuring the other guy's quarterback, and the secondary that has to close out the play. Some of those pieces are going to survive that process. Others, like it looks like is happening to Gordon, are going to get left behind. Bear down, always. If this video gave you something, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments below. Would you start the season with Braxton Jones at left tackle, or would you wait on Trapilo, even if that means risking the first few weeks? I want to read every single answer. See you in the next one.